So today we have with us a fascinating man who has a very interesting perspective on the economy, domestic, local. He is a best-selling author. His most recent book is The Money Revolution: How to Finance the Next American Century. He just recently, there is bipartisan support for a sovereign wealth fund, a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. We're going to discuss that, many other things. This is going to be a very interesting conversation, and yours truly is just going to try to hang on and follow this complex information. Today we have with us none other than Mr. Richard Duncan. Richard, welcome to Street Smart Success.
Thank you, Roger. It's very nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. It's an honor, a privilege, and I'm incredibly excited. Richard, before we get into what you've done most recently and what you're doing, and maybe give us a background leading up to where you are now.
Okay, well, as you mentioned at the beginning, my most recent book is called The Money Revolution: How to Finance the Next American Century. And the reason I'm so happy to have this chance to talk with you and your listeners today is that just last month, both President Biden and former President Trump announced their support for the establishment of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. And that was exactly what my book, The Money Revolution, called for. So I believe you heard me in another podcast discussing that recently, and that was perhaps why you invited me. But your listeners are probably wondering what a U.S. sovereign wealth fund is, why it's necessary, and what it would do for them, and why in the world I came up with such an idea to begin with. And that's where my background comes in. I was born in Kentucky in 1960, made good grades in high school, and managed to get into Vanderbilt. There I studied literature and economics. Literature because I loved it, and economics because I wanted to have a job one day. And after that, I expected to go to law school, but luckily for me, I didn't get in. And plan B was to go and live in France for a year, try to find a job, just take a year off. And so I went to France with very little money and was very lucky. I found a job in Paris as a chauffeur, driving around rich American tourists. And I made enough money doing that so that I was able to keep traveling for 13 months. I traveled around Europe for about 6 months, then spent a month in Egypt, a month in Israel, where I worked in a youth hostel in Jerusalem, and then 2 months in Thailand and Malaysia and Singapore in early 1984. And this was really my big break. I saw Asia was booming economically even then. These economies were growing at a double-digit rate practically. So tremendous growth, but very little competition. I would meet people in the streets who couldn't read maps of their own city. And I realized, go east, young man, this is the land of opportunity. So I went back to Europe and worked again as a chauffeur for a few more months, made some more money, and then went to business school at Babson College, where I studied finance, of course, and accounting, got an MBA. And I had some part-time jobs while I was there. I worked for Wellington Management, which is a very large fund management company in Boston. And they were kind enough, I worked in their international department, and they were kind enough to give me letters of recommendation to stockbrokers who had offices in Hong Kong. And so armed with these letters of introduction, I went to Hong Kong and was very lucky. Within 2 weeks, I landed a job, not with the big English stockbroking companies where I'd hoped to work. And there were no American companies in Hong Kong at that time. But with a local, the British wouldn't hire me because I didn't have any experience. They said, go work for a local Hong Kong Chinese stockbroking company for a little while.